It's the OG fact checker, here to give you a juicy tidbit of history that's verified. From my time in the U.S. Navy to now, I've always sought ways to celebrate and highlight women's achievements. I like learning about women before me who made it possible for me to be who I am. Their stories give me permission to behave badly, but in a good way. So, to that end, I'll tell you the story of Bernice Frankel from Cambridge, Maryland, who joined the Marine Corps Reserve in 1943, served for 2 years, and then got out. She wasn't the first woman to do this, nor did she do anything special while she served, unless you count being trained to drive any military vehicle, no matter the size, as something special. I know the name means nothing to you at first mention, but you have heard of Bernice, who stood at 5'10", could be very direct in manner, and had a mouth like a trucker, or in this case, like a Marine, according to Sally Struthers of All in the Family fame. You've seen her outshine a famous redhead and be a women's liber in the 70s. You've also seen her as a divorced woman with a sharp tongue in the 80s and early 90s. Did you guess Bea Arthur? It's a little hard to guess when I don't use the keywords thank you for being a friend. When I decided to do this episode on Bea Arthur's military service, which was revealed after her death from lung cancer in 2009, I initially took the lazy route and was going to rely on existing articles like the ones in Reserve and National Guard magazine and allthat'sinteresting.com. These articles sensationalized the fact that Arthur denied serving in the military during a 2001 interview, which I viewed on YouTube, but more on that later. The sensationalism bothered me, so I did some fact checking and found Arthur's service record, which is available online in the National Archives. I fell down the rabbit hole, people. If you saw my introduction to this series, then you know I was basically a yeoman with a security clearance in the Navy. So, only a former yeoman can look through a service record and find the story. I found the story, and I hope it takes a bite out of the sensationalism and provides perspective from a female veteran. Bernice Frankel was born in May 1922 in New York City, one of three daughters to parents Philip and Rebecca Frankel, who were originally from Russia and Austria, respectively. The family moved to Maryland, where Philip's occupation is listed as merchant, who appeared to be fairly successful. Bernice attended high school in Cambridge, Maryland, and was an A student. She then trained as a clinical lab technician at the Franklin School in Philadelphia and was hired as a food analyst at the Phillips Packing Company in Cambridge. Arthur wasn't happy, so she left Maryland for New York, where she found clerical work, but the pay wasn't good enough. She was going to start another job when she heard the Marine Corps Reserve needed a few good women and decided to enlist, which she did on February 20th, 1943. Arthur was 20 years old, clearly of age to join, and single at the time, but she needed parental consent. Men only needed parental consent if they were under 18 years old. During Arthur's intake screening, she was evaluated by two people, a man and a woman. The articles I mentioned earlier focused on traits from her entrance evaluations that fit her television personas, without providing perspective, in my opinion. Take note, this evaluation was normally used on men. The woman who screened Arthur, Ensign Virginia K. Outwin, rated her as alert, with posture that was neither positive nor negative, and trim in grooming. In speech, Arthur was articulate with good diction and excellent vocabulary, but in conversation could be argumentative. Her general behavior in attitude and manner, according to Outwin, was overly aggressive with cocky scratched out, and her response frank and open. Outwin noted Arthur was officious, which is defined as volunteering one's services where they are neither asked nor needed. Basically, Outwin classified Arthur as meddlesome and intrusive. The man who screened her, George Linton Jr., found Arthur well poised in military bearing and meticulous in good taste, but had limited vocabulary and was reserved in conversation. As for general behavior, Linton rated her as ingratiating and concurred with frank and open in response. As you can see, these evaluations are contradictory. Let's consider the time period, how women were viewed and treated, and the situation she was being judged in. We don't know what face Arthur wore for both interviews. I find Linton's assessment of her being limited in vocabulary really hard to swallow. She was an A student, according to her high school transcript. And what does Outwin's assessment of overly aggressive means as it pertains to a woman? Remember, the assessment form was normally used on men, and this is the 1940s. It's interesting that both evaluators found Arthur frank and open. Either one of the evaluators saw the other's assessment and agreed, or they came to the same conclusion about her separately. Arthur's first duty station was at headquarters in Washington, D.C., as a clerk typist before she asked for a transfer to attend motor transport school at New River, North Carolina, where she felt she could be of more use. Other duty stations included Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia. In February 1944, B married Private Robert Arthur, spelled Ourthur, in New York City, and the marriage was witnessed by one of her sisters. She then took her husband's name and requested a name change in her records. Robert became a screenwriter responsible for All That Jazz and Grand Prix. Although they divorced after her discharge, B kept her married name as her stage name, changing its spelling and shortened her given name to one syllable. Here's where the sensationalism comes in. 6 months into her marriage, Arthur received a misconduct report for being diagnosed with an STD, and she was docked 36 days in pay. Scandalous, right? But if the people who wrote those articles had done a little digging, they probably would have found the same thing I did, and I'd like to think they would have reported differently. A law was enacted in May 1926 that punished soldiers and sailors with pay forfeiture and potential loss of pension for getting an STD. The law was put into place as a countermeasure to the time lost as a person recovered because technically the person is medically unfit for duty until treatment ends. Arthur got shafted because a law, S 1250, repealed Section 2 of that 1926 law, essentially ending all punishments for catching an STD. It was no longer considered willful misconduct that required a report. With this repeal, if a service member got a venereal disease, it was considered obtained in the line of duty, and they must report right away for treatment or face court-martial or other penalties. The person was still eligible for their pension and additional compensation if they became disabled from it. This law passed unanimously in the Senate in July 1943 and in the House in September 1944. I don't understand why Arthur would get written up a month before that law passed in the House, especially since it was unanimous in the Senate the year before. Having been in the military, I learned that when people don't like you, they'll mess with you. And if they see an opportunity to take you down a peg, they'll jump on it. And it couldn't have been all that big of a deal that required a misconduct report because she was promoted from private to staff sergeant in January 1945. Let me say this. If that happened to me, if I was Bea Arthur, I would not say a word about my military time. And if pressed, I would deflect any questions. And that is what I think Bea Arthur did in that 2001 interview. You can watch this interview for yourself. The interviewer, a female, is clearly trying to lead Arthur into a discussion about World War II and what she did during that time. Then the interviewer says, I had heard somewhere that you had joined the Marines. And Arthur dips her head to the side, pretending to be coy, and says, no, and then deflects the question. You can hear the interviewer give a little laugh afterwards. I perceived that scene as Arthur politely chastising the interviewer, telling her, no, don't go there, and not that she was denying she had served in the military. We don't know if Arthur warned the interviewer beforehand about topics that were off the table, or if she was ambushed by the question and had to pivot. I think it was hasty for these articles to conclude Arthur was denying her military service. She might have felt it was up to her to disclose it, and she'd be right. Not everyone sees serving in the military as something to share. Besides, if she had confirmed her service, the media would have dug up her service record and found that misconduct report, which they did anyway. No doubt it would have overshadowed her acting accomplishments. Plus, she'd have to relive that humiliation all over again. Who wants to relive something so private 50 or 60 years later publicly? How would she defend herself by explaining a law that would have kept that out of her service record was passed a month after she was written up? Arthur was honorably discharged in September 1945. She waived her right to receive a military pension. On discharge paperwork regarding unemployment, she declared she would be attending the New School in New York City for dramatic training to be a radio announcer because there was a lot of work there. It's safe to say Arthur found her voice. She worked her way into theater, receiving attention for her work in off Broadway plays like Three Penny Opera in 1954, and for originating the role of Yetta in Fiddler on the Roof in 1964. She won the Tony Award in 1966 for her performance as Vera Charles in the Broadway musical Mame alongside Angela Lansbury as Mame. This show was directed by Gene Saks, Arthur's second husband since 1950. They had two sons before they divorced in 1979. She reprised that role in the 1974 film version alongside America's favorite redhead who played Mame, Lucille Ball. Her work on Broadway caught the attention of TV producer Norman Lear, who gave her a guest shot as Edith Bunker's cousin, Maud Finley, on his radical 1971 TV show All in the Family. From this guest shot, Arthur got her spin-off show, Maud, in 1972, which ran for 6 seasons and also starred another Golden Girl, Rue McClanahan. In this show, Maud is a middle-aged, loud-mouthed Betty Friedan reading women's liber. At that time, mid-40s was considered middle-aged, and she was on her 4th marriage to Walter, a business owner. All of Lear's shows touched on taboo social topics such as racism, rape, sexuality, substance abuse, child abuse, and miscarriages. But Maud was the first show to address perimenopausal or late in life pregnancy and the choice to end that pregnancy in the 1972 episode titled Maud's Dilemma. She won an Emmy Award for the role in 1977. Maud led to another Norman Lear spinoff, Good Times, starring John Amos and Estelle Roll. On working with Arthur during his guest role on Maud that led to his spinoff, Amos said she was a very strong actress. I mean, her presence would fill the room before she came in, and that voice and the way she carried herself. She could be intimidating if you didn't have your stuff together, but she was a very giving actress and a very consummate professional. 7 years after Maud ended, Arthur was offered another role that would establish a first on television. Dorothy Spornak, a divorced 50-something sharing a house with 3 widows that included her 80-something mother. The Golden Girls was the first show to center around mature women with a cast of women over 40. It ran on NBC from 1985 to 1992, and co-starred Rue McClanahan and Betty White, who Arthur had worked with on Maude, and a little-known theater actress named Estelle Parsons. All four actresses won Emmys for their roles. After The Golden Girls ended, Arthur did guest spots here and there, like on Fox's Malcolm in the Middle and HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm. Arthur was well known for her support of animal rights, LGBTQ causes, and HIV activism. She died of cancer in 2009 at the age of 86. So, to Bernice the Marine, this former squid says, "Hoorah!" and thank you for your service. You came for the truth. Thank you for staying for the story.